$44 million, infinite cocaine rumors, an NC-17 rating that became more famous than the movie itself, a production so chaotic that the behind-the-scenes book became a bigger hit than the film. And somewhere in this countdown, one scandal literally destroyed an entire studio, erased it from existence, because Hollywood gave one director infinite power and zero oversight. These aren't just flops. These are catastrophes where the scandal became the story, where the gossip overtook the movie, where audiences decided the drama off-screen was reason enough to stay home. And here's the thing. In every single case, the people making these films saw the crisis coming and kept going anyway. One of these disasters involved the most famous love affair in Hollywood history. The tabloids covered it like a war. Politicians condemned it. The Vatican weighed in. And the whole time, the budget climbed higher and higher, and the studio just kept writing checks. Another film had a journalist embedded with the production who documented every mistake, every tantrum, every miscalculation, and then published it as a best-selling book that's still assigned in film schools today. By the end, you'll know exactly how scandal turns a potential hit into a punchline and why Hollywood keeps making the same mistake, believing that control of the narrative matters less than control of the production. This is Cinema Bomb Squad. Showgirls, 1995. Let's start with the scandal that was entirely self-inflicted, entirely avoidable, and entirely about a rating. Paul Verhoeven and Joe Eszterhas, the director and writer behind Basic Instinct, reunited for a big-budget, big studio dive into the Las Vegas showgirl underworld. MGM and United Artists put up $61 million, which in 1995 could buy you a Pixar movie or a prestige drama with A-list stars. Instead, it bought lap dances, aggressive nudity, and a spectacularly miscalculated belief that an NC-17 rating could be worn as a badge of honor. The scandal was the rating itself. NC-17 meant no one under 17 admitted, period. It meant most theater chains wouldn't book it. It meant newspapers wouldn't run ads. It meant Blockbuster and Walmart wouldn't stock it. Verhoeven knew this. The studio knew this. And they released it anyway, betting that controversy would override all of it. It didn't. The film opened to $20 million domestic. For a $61 million film with major stars like Elizabeth Berkley, that's a death sentence. The reviews were vicious, not because of the nudity, but because the script was campy trash without the wink. Verhoeven leaned into provocation, but audiences saw exploitation without substance. The real scandal was the miscalculation. Eszterhas had been paid $3 million for the script, one of the highest screenwriting fees ever at that point, and the hype around the NC-17 became the marketing. The movie was sold as an event, as a boundary pusher, as something dangerous. But when audiences actually saw it, they saw a melodrama about showgirls that took itself way too seriously while also being ridiculous. Berkley's career never recovered. Verhoeven would eventually reclaim some credibility. But Showgirls became the punchline, the example of what happens when you confuse scandal with story. This flop proves that a controversial rating is not a business plan, and that provocation without craft is just expensive noise. And this was just an opening act. The Bonfire of the Vanities, 1990. Because the next scandal was so messy, so public, and so thoroughly documented that it became a Harvard Business School case study in how not to make a movie. Brian De Palma directing. Tom Hanks, Bruce Willis, Melanie Griffith starring. An adaptation of Tom Wolfe's best-selling satirical novel about greed and race and justice in 1980s New York. Warner Brothers spent $47 million. And every single decision, from casting to tone to execution, was wrong. Here's the scandal. A journalist named Julie Salomon was embedded with the production, given full access, and she documented everything. The result was a book called The Devil's Candy, and it exposed the production as a masterclass in ego, miscommunication, and panic. De Palma's indecision. The casting of Tom Hanks, then still known for comedy, as a wealthy, morally bankrupt bond trader when the book's character was darker and more acidic. The decision to soften the satire. The reshoots. The fear. And it all leaked before the movie even came out. By the time Bonfire hit theaters in December 1990, the industry already knew it was a disaster. Audiences knew. Critics were sharpening knives. The film opened to $15 million domestic. It limped to a total of $16 million. Against a $47 million budget, it was a catastrophic embarrassment. The reviews called it toothless, miscast, and confused. Warner Brothers had expected a prestige awards player. Instead, they got a flop so complete that it derailed De Palma's A-list momentum and became a punchline. The real damage was the book. Salomon's reporting revealed that everyone involved knew the movie wasn't working, but no one had the power or will to fix it. Studios started restricting journalist access after Bonfire. The embedded all-access production diary basically died because of this film. This flop proves that when your behind-the-scenes chaos is more compelling than your story, you've already lost. But we're just getting to the production nightmares that made headlines while the cameras were still rolling. Ishtar, 1987. Same decade, different kind of scandal. This one was about budget rumors, press leaks, and a narrative that the movie was doomed before anyone saw a frame. Elaine May, one of the smartest writer-directors in Hollywood, made a comedy about two terrible lounge singers who get caught up in a Middle Eastern conflict. Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman starred. Columbia Pictures greenlit it. And then the budget started ballooning. Reports vary by source, but estimates climbed from around $30 million to somewhere between $51 and $55 million, making it one of the most expensive comedies ever made at that time. Here's where the scandal began. The press started covering the production like a disaster in progress. Stories about shooting in Morocco, stories about May's perfectionism, stories about takes and retakes, and a schedule that kept stretching. The narrative became, "This is Heaven's Gate all over again. This is an auteur out of control. This is a comedy that cost more than an action movie, and that's insane." By the time Ishtar opened in May 1987, the reputation was cooked. It didn't matter that some critics actually liked it or that the film had moments of sharp, weird humor. The scandal was the production itself. Audiences stayed away. The domestic gross was around $14 million. The international total pushed it to just over $19 million worldwide. For a film that cost $50+ million, that's annihilation. The irony is that Ishtar isn't actually the train wreck it's remembered as. It's odd, it's slow, it's definitely not for everyone. But the real failure was the perception. The press decided it was a disaster months before release, and that became the story. Warren Beatty's reputation survived. Dustin Hoffman moved on. But Elaine May, one of the great comic minds in Hollywood, never directed another theatrical feature. The scandal ended her directing career. This flop proves that if the industry decides your movie is a disaster before it's released, no amount of actual quality will save it. And that's nothing compared to the film that didn't just kill a movie or a career. It killed an entire studio. Heaven's Gate, 1980. Picture this, it's 1980. United Artists is a legendary studio. They've just come off Rocky, and they're on top of the world. They greenlight a sprawling Western epic from Michael Cimino, the director who won Best Picture and Best Director for The Deer Hunter 2 years earlier. They give him creative control. They trust him, and then he destroys them. Heaven's Gate is the scandal that changed Hollywood, not because of an affair or a rating or a book, but because of what happens when a studio gives a director infinite power an infinite budget, and walks away. The original budget was around $11 million. By the time shooting wrapped, it had exploded to somewhere between $36 and $44 million, depending on the source. Cimino shot millions of feet of film. He built entire frontier towns. He demanded take after take after take. He ordered the construction to be rebuilt because the proportions were slightly wrong. He delayed the release. He delivered a cut that was over 5 hours long. United Artists panicked. They released a version in November 1980 that was still over 3.5 hours. Critics annihilated it. The New York Times called it an unqualified disaster. Audiences rejected it completely. The film opened in a single New York theater and was pulled within days. It was re-released later in a shorter cut. Nothing helped. Heaven's Gate grossed about $3.5 million domestically. Against a budget north of $40 million, it was an extinction-level event. United Artists never recovered. The studio was sold to MGM in 1981. The scandal wasn't just a flop, it was a cautionary tale about auteur excess, about what happens when the creative vision becomes untethered from budget, audience, or reason. Cimino's career cratered. He directed a few more films, but he never regained the trust or the power. Heaven's Gate became the example, the shorthand, the case study. When people talk about directors losing control, this is the movie they mean. This flop proves that infinite creative freedom without oversight is not a gift. It's a death sentence for the movie and the studio. And somehow, even Heaven's Gate isn't the most famous scandal on this list. Cleopatra, 1963. Because nothing, not a controversial rating, not an embedded journalist, not even the destruction of a studio, comes close to the scandal that defined an era, captivated the world, and nearly bankrupted one of the biggest studios in Hollywood. Cleopatra was supposed to be prestige, Elizabeth Taylor as the Egyptian queen. A sprawling historical epic. 20th Century Fox poured everything into it. The original budget was $2 million. By the time the film finally limped into theaters, estimates put the cost somewhere between $31 and $44 million. The numbers vary depending on how you account for marketing, reshoots, and chaos, but everyone agrees it was the most expensive film ever made at that point. And the scandal was Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Taylor was cast as Cleopatra. Burton was cast as Mark Antony. Both were married to other people, and during the notoriously long, troubled production in Rome, they began one of the most famous affairs in Hollywood history. The tabloids exploded. Paparazzi swarmed the set. The coverage was global and relentless. The Vatican condemned them. Politicians weighed in. It was everywhere. Meanwhile, the production was a nightmare. Taylor fell seriously ill and had to be hospitalized. The original director was fired. Sets were rebuilt. The schedule stretched on for years. Fox was bleeding money, and the studio came dangerously close to collapse. The scandal was so loud that by the time Cleopatra finally opened in June 1963, it was as much about the affair as the movie. And here's the twist. The film was actually a hit. Sort of. It grossed $57 million and became the highest-grossing film of 1963. But it wasn't enough. Against a budget that had spiraled so far out of control, even being the #1 movie of the year couldn't save it. Fox took a massive loss. The studio had to sell off parts of its backlot, the land that would eventually become Century City in Los Angeles, just to stay afloat. Taylor and Burton eventually married, then divorced, then remarried, then divorced again. Their relationship became as famous as their films. But Cleopatra remained the ultimate example of a production where the off-screen drama consumed everything. The movie itself is long, gorgeous, and uneven. It won 4 Oscars, all in technical categories. Critics were mixed, but none of that mattered. The scandal was the story. The affair, the budget, the chaos. It all became larger than the film. This flop proves that even when your movie is number one, if the cost and the scandal are big enough, you can still lose everything. So here's the pattern. 5 films, 5 different scandals, but the same core failure. In every case, the people in charge lost control of the narrative. Showgirls let the rating become the story. Bonfire let a journalist document the disaster. Ishtar let the press decide it was doomed. Heaven's Gate let the director destroy the studio. Cleopatra let the affair overshadow the film, and in every case, audiences made a choice. They decided the scandal was reason enough to stay away, or in Cleopatra's case, reason enough to show up for the wrong reasons, but not enough to make the math work. Hollywood learned some of these lessons. Embedded journalists mostly disappeared. Directors don't get blank checks the way Cimino did. But the lesson studios never quite learn is this. You can't control the scandal, but you can control how much power you give it. And if the scandal becomes bigger than the movie, you've already lost.